these people are now living an entirely new life. It's a new world, and they discovered a new world and the people in it. And ironically, the bubonic plague ended up wiping out most of the people here as well in the form of smallpox. And it spread, and it, as we all know, went through the native population, and it triggered this event. And I kind of like to call it like the arms race of empires with powers in Europe, like growing national powers in Europe, because now that these nations have middle class, they have money to spend on navies. They can start policing the seas for their trade goods to keep up, so they're not losing anything from, well, they would do stuff to pirates, but the point of the Navy was it reduced that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
But the thing is now you have these new lands that have now ironically been depopulated, mostly through disease, but also through violence. We all know that Cortez came and they fought the Aztecs, and there was wars here as well. But now all these powers in Western Europe, these growing national powers, had found an entirely new land resources, more than they would have expected, because instead of finding the East, they found something entirely else, entirely new, even more.
Mm-hmm.
And now these rising national powers started competing for not just the resource, but obviously the land. You had the French settle in where we are now in Canada and New France, and eventually we would have the 13 British colonies established in what is today the eastern seaboard of the United States, and as well as places like where my mom's from in the Yucatan Peninsula with Spanish colonists.
Mm-hmm.
And very quickly, that we were saying, I coined that term, like the race of empires. Within less than within 150 years of the end of the Black Plague, there were major European population settlements in North America. And within less than 100 years of that, most of North America, east of the Mississippi, had been completely colonized by Western European powers, which is a big, like, that's more land than they have in Europe when you think about it, right? It's a big, it's not a small task. And so I just wanted to see, we had wanted to go back and like look at the domino chain. So we had the Black Death, and then we had the rise of these merchants who now funded the New World, and now we have a rise of national powers with the population that has money, as well as not just money, but now they're also literate as well. Because in between that time, you had the Renaissance and all that stuff, right? Which is a whole nother big topic we can.
Yeah, it's crazy, even up until just this point, right? Like, so you're going to go even further.
Yes, yeah, because say we're in like the 1600s now, right? Like,
yeah, but it is so interesting that obviously a horrible event, like decimating families, but from that this value of labor that we see throughout the medieval era type of thing, into the Renaissance, that you get this kind of drive, right? Because I think it is so interesting that prior to, when you just had kind of kings and nobles were the only ones that kind of dictated what was going to really happen with the economies.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, it was very linear, bottleneck in that sense.
Very linear. And because also on top of that, they represent a very small population, right?
Yes.
And so if the only people in your society who have any kind of purchasing power is also like a very small population, you don't require kind of, or you don't have a desire to kind of gain all these extra things that you get out of, like, when we have this entire like kind of merchant class that kind of comes up, they also want things of their own, and that kind of drive to kind of explore, which I think you've already touched upon, right?
Find more goods,
yeah, right. Like, it's not even just the like kings and queens and nobles
now
that want to find a new way to
what used to be the lowly
India and
pleb,
China.
is now someone. It might have been a lowly pleb 80 years before, is now coercing in conversation with the royal court, and they're working together.
Yeah.
And the court's
Right,
like, all
like
right,
that.
well, when you get back, we'll have some land for you. We'll build a house on it, but find some gold too while you're out there, or some
Yeah.
spices or chocolate, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, right? Yeah. It's
Chocolate? Yes,
yeah.
yes. Which
Right.
actually, there was a
It
point
is
where chocolate was weighted more than gold at one point in Spain's history. Very briefly,
yeah.
when they first made contact with the Aztecs, there was a point where like the cacao bean was insanely valuable.
Yeah.
And it was because people in Europe wanted it, and there was the demand for it. Whereas before, the serfdom class never had disposable income from their labor.
Yeah.
And we're looking at
Yeah.
the birth of like you and I even now is we're a working class, but we own our we work to own our own space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
that basic idea kind of almost started there.
Yeah, just in that shift, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And to your
Uh,
point, you made a good point where like it's not only just that like they're working together to find these things, and it starts changing the way you look at how you do things philosophically too,
mhm.
in terms of governance, because as you go on with time, right, Britain and France established colonies here, and Spain. We all know that South America, like places like Peru and Chile, they started establishing. Which I didn't know there's like 30 million people almost in Chile. I was like, wow, man, that's
Mhm.
and that like it's skinny, but like they got them in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these places they started, growing economically, population wise, to the point where, as we know, in the eastern seaboard here in the United States, the 13 colonies became very economically strong, powerful, and distinct from England after only
Yeah.
about 100 years. And again, this is because again, the plague that came with them to the New World, there was resistance from the natives, but it wouldn't have been the same if the smallpox hadn't worked its way through the population the way it had. And these colonies really quickly just exploded into these places. Like you got even places like Mexico City, which obviously Mexico kind of expanded out from there. But
Mhm.
like even the idea that this metropolitan center was a powerful entity in its own right, from these separate from the bodies that entities and nations that founded them. And they started now developing their own identity because it's made up of populations that are not just wealthy, but they're also starting to become literate as well, because you have technological advancements in these time over the course of these period we've been talking about, like the printing press and stuff.
Mhm.
People en masse that can afford it start to become literate, and when they
Yeah.
start to become literate, they start to look at their relationship with the authority and government that runs the world they live in. And
Mhm.
as we all know,
Yeah.
in the Americans' case, most famously known, is that they felt that they were paying and being taxed for an empire that didn't care about them and didn't have their interests in heart. And
Yeah.
then you have people coming to live there from Europe over the course of 200-300 years. And as these people are coming and they're living and they're working and they're developing skills, they're learning how to be independent, they're running nations under their own kind of civil structure. And within very little time of the New World colonies kind of becoming populous and economically unique, almost within no time of that, you see this explosion of colonial revolution.